Hello, hello, hello. It's I, Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and this is a substitute for my usual Thursday Legit Podcast Pro live stream. I was traveling on Thursday because I had the great good fortune to be invited to speak at a very prestigious conference yesterday at the Practicing Law Institute in San Francisco. I was invited to participate in something called Technotainment and to give a talk about the legal issues that arise in the podcasting space. And of course, as I was in the midst of this travel, some news broke that I thought I would talk about today and just share a little bit. So here we are. The news as reported in yesterday, that was Friday, October 7th, in Pod News and apparently some other places, that Spotify, the headline is Spotify makes show without original hosts. And the story has to do with the show Sex Lies and DM Slides. The originator of that show, the original host, Gizzy Erskine, posted an Instagram saying that the show, created by Spotify UK, or made by Spotify UK, is now being made, quote, without us. If Spotify don't want to make it with us, that's fine, but do not steal our format and name. We created it at our kitchen table, and Spotify just paid for it to be made. Well, I want to take some issue with that statement. I'll tell you that Spotify's response to that was that Spotify spokesman issued a statement. At Spotify, we take intellectual property extremely seriously. Sex Lies and DM Slides is a wholly owned Spotify original podcast inclusive of name and format, and we look forward to watching the show continue to evolve. So they seem to be saying, yeah, it's our show. We're continuing to make it. Sorry, Gigi and the other Gizzy, sorry to you, but you're no longer the host of the show. Well, what did they expect? You know, even if they did create the show on their own, at some point they made a deal with Spotify. I almost said with the devil. No, with Spotify. They made the deal, and now they are going to have to live with it. Now, whatever that deal looked like, and I am purely speculating here, but what I can tell you is what I know about these kinds of deals. When you take your podcast and go exclusive with a network or a platform, and Spotify sort of acts like both in this arena, when you do that, you are selling them your show. You are not just agreeing to let them have it for a while, unless you have a really good negotiating position, which is what Joe Rogan actually has done, is he is licensing his show to Spotify exclusively for a period of time, but he's retaining the right to make the Joe Rogan Experience show, whatever that continues to be. But I suspect that when this team created Sex Lies and DM Slides and took it to Spotify, they agreed to terms of a deal that gives Spotify full ownership of the brand, the title of the show, the format of the show, and everything else about the show, including all the content episodes that were made under the Spotify banner. I know what happened with the episodes made prior to that, if any, and I just don't know the history of this show. That may be up in the air, but it is a safe bet that they sold the show to Spotify. And when you do that, you're selling it to them for good. For good. Now, there are things that a lawyer, good representation through lawyers who know what they're doing, can accomplish to help eliminate some of these kinds of issues. One is to structure things as that license style that I mentioned Rogan does. Another is to build in a what we call a reversion or a turnaround clause that says, look, if the network decides to stop making the show, if the platform decides not to make the show anymore, then you get the rights back. Now, sometimes the buyers in those scenarios do expect some kind of holdback period where you're not going to create new episodes for a period of time, or you're going to, certain limitations on what you can and can't do with it. But my expectation here is that Spotify knew what they were doing. They were within their rights to continue or relaunch the show with new hosts, and they've got a format that works, and they've got a title that works, and that's their prerogative. So I guess the hint or the tip for podcasters is, if you are going to be looking at making a deal with a platform, a network, a production company, a studio, it's not just they're going to pay you to make episodes for a while. Understand that they are probably trying to buy the show, and that if the show then gets canceled, well, you're not going to get to continue making the show yourself somewhere else. That is the nature of these kinds of deals, and it's the nature of how intellectual property law is transferred in these scenarios. Now, this comes up right now because also Spotify announced that it is canceling 11 of its Spotify original shows. Those canceled shows represent less than 2% of the 500 shows or so that Spotify produces as originals, but it is going to result in layoffs for some of the staff there, and that probably includes hosts as well as creators of shows and producers and creative team writers and those kinds of things. So that's the that's the thing. So don't expect those shows to come back somewhere else or to be revived without Spotify. They belong to Spotify, and by canceling them, that's Spotify's prerogative. Put them up on a shelf. They may bring them back in a number of years. Who knows? Anything can happen. However, what we're seeing is a maturing of at least this part of the podcast space, the made for original content for these platforms. These platforms are starting to act and behave like mainstream media networks. And when something isn't performing, when the show is costing more than they can justify from what it's earning or generating or what's happening, the shows get canceled. And the creators of the material should not expect that you can sell it to Spotify until they're done with it and then you have it back. That's just not the way it works. And this is something that has come up several times in recent years. The creators of some shows on Gimlet a couple of years ago made some noise. One of those shows was called The Nod. When they learned that Spotify was looking to take it over to television, and I guess they made a deal with Quibi or something, that was only then did they realize that they were, maybe they were going along for the ride, but they certainly weren't driving the boat. And that they did not have the kind of control that they thought they had or thought that they should have.